The alarm blared across Deep Space Outpost Artemis, its harsh sound echoing through the metal corridors. Astra Chen sprinted down the hallway, her boots pounding against the floor as she dodged startled crew members. Her dark hair had escaped its usual tight bun, flowing behind her like a banner as she ran. "Unknown vessel approaching," announced the station eye in its mechanical voice, not matching any known configurations. Astra's heart hammered in her chest as she burst onto the command deck. The large viewing screen showed the vast blackness of space, dotted with distant stars. And there, growing larger by the second, was something that made her breath catch. "Status report," she demanded, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Captain Rivera turned to her, his face ashen. It appeared out of nowhere. No warp signature, no engine trails. 1 minute empty space, the next. He gestured helplessly at the screen. The vessel was unlike anything Astra had ever seen. It gleamed like burnished metal, but its surface seemed to ripple slightly, as if not entirely solid. Its shape defied human design principles, curves and angles that somehow worked together despite seeming impossible. "Are they responding to hails?" Astra asked, moving to her station. As the outpost's senior xenolinguist, first contact scenarios were technically her domain. She had trained for this moment for years, but the reality of it made her mouth go dry. "They've scanned us thoroughly," Communications Officer Patul replied, but no response to our standard greeting package. The command deck fell silent as everyone stared at the alien vessel. It had stopped its approach and now hung in space about 2 kilometers from the station, close enough to be unmistakably intentional. "Wait," Patel suddenly straightened in her chair. "We're receiving something." Astra rushed to the communications console, put it through the translation matrix. The speakers crackled with sounds that were clearly not random noise. There was pattern and structure, but nothing resembling human language. The computer worked to analyze it, lines of code streaming across Astra's screen. Then, in flat, emotionless English, came the translation. "Primitive species detected. Evaluating threat level. Minimal." The words hung in the air, bringing a chill to everyone present. Not a greeting, not an introduction, an assessment. Like scientists noting the behavior of insects. "They're launching something." Security Officer Ramirez called out. "Small craft heading for Docking Bay 3. Captain Rivera's hand hovered over the alert button. "Defensive measures." Astra stepped forward. "No, this is first contact. We can't start with hostility." Rivera hesitated, then nodded. "All personnel, prepare for first contact protocol. Security teams on standby, but weapons holstered." Astra rushed to the docking bay, her mind racing through everything she knew about possible alien communication strategies. Behind her, a small team followed. 2 security officers, a medical officer, and a physical sciences specialist. They reached the bay just as the airlock cycled. Astra straightened her uniform, trying to calm her breathing. This moment would go down in human history, alongside the first steps on the Moon and Mars. And somehow, she was here for it. The inner door slid open. The being that stepped through was tall, at least 7 feet, with a body covered in iridescent scales that shifted color slightly with each movement. It had multiple eyes set in what appeared to be a face, though the arrangement was nothing like human features. Its limbs were jointed differently, giving it a fluid, almost unsettling grace. Behind the first alien came 2 others, carrying what might have been weapons or scientific instruments. Astra stepped forward, palms open in the universal gesture of peace. "Welcome to Artemis Outpost. I am Astra Chen, representing humanity." The alien regarded her with those strange, multifaceted eyes. When it spoke, the sound was like water flowing over stones, musical but utterly foreign. The translator on Astra's tablet worked for a moment, then produced, "Your species is unexpected in this sector. Your technology is primitive. Why are you here?" There was something in the alien's posture, a tension Astra recognized despite the physiological differences. She had studied body language across human cultures for years, and some things seemed universal. "You're running from something," she said quietly, ignoring protocol, and speaking directly to the being. The alien froze. All three of them went completely still in a way that seemed unnatural. The lead being's eyes focused intently on Astra, studying her with new interest. "Perhaps," came the translated reply after a long pause, "you are not as primitive as we thought." 6 months passed in a blur of diplomatic meetings, cultural exchanges, and technological revelations. Astra stood before the Coalition Council chamber, straightening her new formal uniform with nervous fingers. The massive room had been constructed aboard the Vordath mothership, designed to accommodate all 5 species now joined in alliance. Astra was the only human present among the 20 representatives. The Vordath dominated the chamber with their tall, scaled bodies. The Meridae floated in their containment spheres, their gaseous forms swirling with colors that reflected their emotions. The insectoid Krell clicked and buzzed near the ceiling, while the crystalline Ionter glowed faintly at the edges of the room. "The human defenses were inadequate," said High Commander Vextar, his scales shifting to a deep purple of disapproval. "Their colony fell within hours." Astra clenched her fists at her sides, forcing her face to remain calm. Yesterday, the human colony on Proxima Centauri had been destroyed. Over 10,000 lives lost, families torn apart, dreams shattered in an instant. The first human world beyond the solar system, gone. "With respect, Commander," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "we requested Coalition defensive technology 3 months ago, and your engineers couldn't properly implement it," snapped another Vordath. "Your technology is centuries behind ours." A Meridae representative floated forward, its containment sphere humming. "The humans have shown remarkable adaptability. Perhaps if we—" "Adaptability is not enough against the Void Heralds," interrupted an Iontar, its crystalline voice ringing through the chamber. "We need military might, not creativity." The debate continued for hours. Astra presented Earth's military history, their tactics, their willingness to fight. The alien representatives listened with what seemed like polite indifference. In the end, the decision was made. Humans would be relegated to support duties only, medical assistance, resource transportation, and maintenance. Their ships would not join the main Coalition fleet. As the meeting adjourned, Astra walked slowly toward the exit, exhaustion and frustration weighing on her shoulders. She had failed her people, failed those 10,000 souls on Proxima Centauri. "Diplomat Chen." Astra turned to see a junior Vordath officer approaching. Unlike most of his kind, his scales remained a neutral blue, not shifting to show emotion. "Officer Zexrel," she acknowledged. Among the Vordath, he had been one of the few who treated humans with genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. He glanced around quickly, then discreetly handed her a small crystal, its surface glowing faintly. "Intercepted communications from the Void Heralds," he whispered. "3 of our best cryptographers couldn't decode them. Perhaps your different perspective might help." Astra carefully pocketed the crystal. "Why give this to me?" "Your superiors." "My superiors are proud," Zexrel said simply. "I watched the humans at your Antarctic research station, how they survived when their power failed during winter, how they adapted. We don't adapt well." Back in her quarters, Astra worked through the night. The crystal contained dozens of transmissions between Void Herald vessels. The pattern seemed random at first, but then she began applying frameworks from ancient Earth languages, Sumerian, Navajo, even the programming language LOSP. By morning, exhausted but determined, she had cracked it. And what she discovered made her blood run cold. "They're not just conquering," she whispered to herself as she read through the translated messages. "They're harvesting consciousness itself." The Void Heralds weren't just destroying worlds. They were collecting the neurological patterns of sentient beings at the moment of death, storing them for some unknown purpose. Billions of minds, trapped in their final moments of terror. Astra grabbed her tablet and ran toward the command center. The Coalition needed to know this immediately. This wasn't just war, it was something far worse. As she rushed through the corridors, the ship's alarms suddenly began to wail. Through a viewport, she saw the flashes of weapons fire in the distance. Another attack had begun. The Void Heralds had found them, and they were coming to harvest. This is suicide. The Vordath commander spat, his scales flashing angry red. His large fist crashed down on the holographic display, distorting the battle plans hovering in the air. Commander Kai Santos, former Earth Special Forces, simply leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Unlike the aliens towering over him, his face remained calm. A fresh scar ran across his left cheek, still pink from recent fighting. "Maybe for you," he said with a slight smile. "For us, it's Tuesday." The Coalition war room fell silent. 7 alien officers stared at the human with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disgust. The last 2 months had been devastating. 7 star systems lost, billions dead or captured by the Void Heralds. Even the Coalition's advanced technology couldn't stop the enemy's relentless advance. Astra stepped forward, her translator device ready. What Commander Santos means is that humans have extensive experience fighting against superior forces. It's part of our history. "History won't save us from extinction," growled a Krell representative, its mandibles clicking nervously. "The Void Heralds adapt to every strategy we deploy. Their ships outgun ours 3-1. Astra brought up her own data display. "That's why we don't fight them directly. Look here." She pointed to a small moon orbiting a gas giant. "Their command ship is heavily protected from frontal assault, but vulnerable here in its energy distribution network." "We've analyzed that approach," replied the Vordath commander dismissively. "Our largest battleship couldn't get close enough without being detected." "We don't need a battleship." Kai pushed himself off the wall and walked to the display. "We need something small, fast, and unexpected. We've modified one of your cargo shuttles with a stealth system based on old Earth submarine technology. They won't see us coming." The plan was simple on paper, impossible in execution. A small team would approach through the gas giant's thick atmosphere, using its radiation to mask their signature. Then they would attach to the Void Herald command ship and disable its central coordination node, not destroying it, but introducing subtle errors into its targeting systems. "Our forces will still appear threatening enough to draw fire," Astra explained, "but their shots will miss by small margins, just enough for us to get close and do real damage." "This plan relies on too many variables," the Merida representative objected, its gaseous form swirling anxiously in its containment sphere. "The chances of success are minimal." "Sometimes minimal is all you need," Kai replied. Against better judgment, with minimal support, the mission launched the next day. Just Kai and 12 human volunteers, using Coalition technology modified in ways its creators had never imagined. The aliens watched them depart with what seemed like pity. 3 days later, as the main Coalition fleet engaged in yet another losing battle, something unexpected happened. The Void Herald command ship began firing erratically. Its fighter craft lost formation. For crucial minutes, the perfectly coordinated enemy became chaotic. The Coalition forces, following Astra's hastily transmitted instructions, pressed the advantage. For the first time, a Void Herald command ship was destroyed. When Kai and his team returned, 9 of them, anyway, the Coalition leadership was waiting. The humans looked terrible, injured, exhausted, grieving for lost comrades. But they had accomplished what an entire alien fleet could not. "How?" demanded the Vordath commander, his scales now a confused mix of colors. "Our intelligence suggested this was impossible." Kai tossed a twisted piece of metal onto the table. "We used your tools differently. This is part of a Coalition plasma cutter, repurposed as a shield disruptor. And this," he held up a small device, "is an old Earth music player, modified to broadcast interference patterns. We succeeded because the Void Heralds didn't expect us to try, added Lieutenant Rivera, her arm in a makeshift sling. They planned for logical approaches. Humans aren't always logical. Later, in the now silent chamber, Astra addressed the coalition leadership. Her voice echoed in the large room as she stood tall despite her exhaustion. "You have better ships, better weapons, better technology," she said. "We have something you don't: unpredictability. The Void Heralds can't calculate what they don't understand." For once, the alien representatives had nothing to say. They looked at these strange, fragile humans with new eyes, not as primitives to be tolerated, but as warriors with unexpected wisdom. The alarm screamed throughout Coalition headquarters as the station shook violently. Emergency lights flashed, casting eerie red shadows as people and aliens ran through the corridors. The Void Heralds had found them. Astra ducked as a ceiling panel crashed down beside her. She pressed forward against the crowd, searching for the command center. Through a viewport, she caught glimpses of the battle outside. Coalition ships being torn apart by the much larger Void Herald vessels. "Move! Get to emergency stations," she shouted, helping a young technician who had fallen. A massive explosion rocked the station. The lights failed completely for 3 seconds before the backup systems engaged. When they came back on, Astra found herself face to face with the Vordev High Commander. His once proud scales were dull with dust and streaked with purple blood. "The eastern sector is breached," he said, his translator struggling with his pained voice. "We cannot hold them." Without thinking, Astra grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a side corridor as another explosion hit. "This way. The medical bay is still intact." The Vordath commander was heavy, leaning against her as they stumbled through smoke-filled passages. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Behind them, the horrible screeching sound of Void Herald boarding parties grew louder. By the time they reached the medical bay, Astra's uniform was soaked with sweat and alien blood. Medical staff, both human and alien, worked frantically on the wounded. Through the chaos, she spotted Kai, directing a group of human soldiers who were setting up defensive positions. His face was bloody, a deep gash running down from his hairline. His left arm hung awkwardly at his side. But his eyes were clear and focused. "Astra, status report," he called out, helping a medic move a wounded Iontar. "Eastern sector gone. Command deck hit hard. I haven't heard from Admiral Vexnar or any of the senior staff." She helped the Vordath commander onto an empty bed. Over the next few hours, reports filtered in, each worse than the last. The Void Heralds had launched a coordinated attack on multiple coalition bases. Most of High Command was dead or missing. Almost a third of their fleet was destroyed. 3 days later, the surviving coalition leadership gathered in what had once been a storage bay, now converted to a makeshift command center. Representatives from each species huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. "We need to retreat," insisted the senior Krell, its mandibles clicking nervously. "Abandon this sector entirely." "Retreat where?" asked a Merida representative, its containment sphere's color reflecting despair. "They found us once. They'll find us again." "The Iontar homeworlds are prepared to negotiate separate terms with the Void Heralds," announced their crystal-voiced diplomat. "Perhaps if we offer resources." "They don't want resources," Kai interrupted, stepping forward. Despite his injuries, he stood straight, his voice steady. "They want us. All of us. Our consciousness, our essence." The aliens fell silent, turning to the human officer. Over the past weeks, they had watched as alien species fell into despair while humans rallied, improvised, and fought on. "We don't have time for retreat or negotiation," Kai continued. "We need to end this." Astra joined him, bringing up the data she had been analyzing since their escape. "During the attack, I managed to download more intercepted Void Herald communications. I found something important." She displayed a complex diagram showing energy patterns. "The Void Heralds don't just share tactics. They share consciousness. They're connected through a specific subspace frequency. That's how they coordinate so perfectly. And how would this help us? Asked the Vordath second commander skeptically. We cannot jam their entire network. We don't need to jam it, Astra explained, her eyes bright with determination. We just need to introduce the right kind of disruption. A specific frequency pattern that will create feedback in their neural network. She outlined a plan so audacious that it seemed impossible. A direct assault on the Void Herald mothership to plant a frequency disruptor at the heart of their network. It would require perfect timing, incredible risk, and almost certainly mean death for whoever delivered the device. This isn't strategy, the Vordath second commander hissed after hearing the full plan. This is suicide. Kai looked across the room, his eyes meeting Astra's. A moment of perfect understanding passed between them. Sometimes, he said quietly, they're the same thing. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. For the first time, the alien representatives saw something in these humans they had never fully appreciated before. A willingness to face impossible odds without surrendering to despair. One by one, the alien leaders began to nod. If humans could face death with such resolve, perhaps there was hope after all. The final battle unfolded across the star system like a deadly dance. Coalition ships moved in formations once thought impossible, executing maneuvers that their designers had never intended. At the heart of the command ship, Astra watched the holographic display with her heart in her throat. Each light represented hundreds of lives, alien and human alike, fighting together against the darkness. The Void Heralds are responding to our primary assault, reported a Merida tactical officer, its containment sphere pulsing with tense colors. Their forces are concentrating exactly where we predicted. Astra nodded, unable to speak. Her eyes were fixed on a small, fast-moving craft breaking away from the main fleet. Kai's ship, so tiny against the vastness of space and the massive enemy vessels. Secondary fleet moving into position, announced the Vordath acting commander, his scales a determined blue-green. The path is clear for Operation Thunderbolt. On the small infiltration craft, Kai Santos checked his team one last time. 4 humans, 2 Vordath, and a Krell engineer, all volunteers for what everyone knew was likely a one-way mission. Their faces were grim but determined. Final approach in 60 seconds, said Lieutenant Rivera from the pilot's seat. Her hands moved steadily over the controls despite the enemy fire flashing outside their viewports. Stealth systems holding. Kai touched the small device secured to his chest, the frequency disruptor that Astra had designed. It needed to be placed at the central neural hub of the Void Herald mothership to work. The science was sound, but the delivery was the impossible part. Remember, he told his team quietly, we only need one of us to reach the central chamber. If anyone makes it that far, the mission succeeds. The coalition lives. The craft shuddered as it slipped through the mothership's outer defenses, using the chaos of battle as cover. They docked with a barely audible thud against the massive vessel's hull, cutting through using tools modified from mining equipment. Back at command, Astra watched as Kai's signal penetrated deeper into the enemy ship. The mothership was enormous, over 20 kilometers long, a city in space designed for a single purpose, the harvest of consciousness. They'd been detected, reported a communications officer. Enemy forces converging on their position. Astra gripped the console edge, knuckles white. The plan required perfect timing. The coalition fleet couldn't launch their main assault until the disruptor was activated. Minutes stretched like hours. One by one, the signals from Kay's team began to disappear from the tracker. We're losing them, whispered someone nearby. Then, for 30 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Kai's signal had reached the central chamber but went silent. The entire command deck held its breath. Suddenly, the massive Void Herald mothership seemed to shudder. Its perfectly coordinated attack patterns faltered. Fighter craft that had moved with eerie precision began to drift aimlessly or fire at random targets. It's working, shouted the Krell tactical officer. The neural disruption is spreading through their network. Across the battlefield, Void Herald ships began firing on each other. Their coordination shattered. Some simply stopped moving altogether. The hive mind that had made them so deadly was now their greatest weakness, as confusion spread like a virus through their consciousness. All ships, commence final attack phase, ordered the Vordath commander, his voice steady despite the emotion showing in his scales. For the coalition, for humanity, victory came at terrible cost. Half the human fleet destroyed, countless alien ships lost. But for the first time since the war began, the Void Heralds retreated, their once unstoppable force broken and confused. Of Kai and his team, there was no sign. The mothership's central section had been destroyed in the final assault. 1 year later, Astra Chen stood before the new Coalition Council, now as humanity's official representative. Her formal uniform bore the new insignia, a stylized Earth surrounded by symbols of all 5 Coalition species. "We gather today to commemorate the victory at Theta Sector," announced the Vordath High Chancellor, "and to unveil the Monument of Remembrance." Across the galaxy, on a dozen worlds, identical monuments were being revealed, towering structures of stone and metal and crystal, bearing the names of those lost in the final battle. At the center of each monument stood a simple human figure, arm raised toward the stars. "The Void Heralds couldn't understand you," the Vordath High Chancellor said privately to Astra after the ceremony. His scales shimmered with respect, an emotion rarely shown to other species. They couldn't calculate hope in the face of impossible odds. Astra touched the medallion at her throat. Kai's, recovered from the wreckage of the mothership. The small disk of metal was bent and scorched, but the Earth insignia was still visible. "That's the thing about humans," she said quietly, looking up at the stars now safe for all species. "We've always been bad at accepting impossible." In the vast darkness between stars, humanity had found its place, not as the most advanced or powerful species, but as the one that refused to surrender when logic said they should. And in that stubborn hope, they had found their greatest strength.